Well, hello and welcome to everyone. On behalf of Parity, I'd like to say thank you for joining us today. My name is Marian Edmonds-Allen. I'm the Executive Director of Parity, and we are so grateful to the NGO CSW 2020 Forum Committee for inviting us to present this workshop. We are virtual from Utah, from New York City, and we know that you are all over the world, and we are grateful that you are with us, and we hope that you are keeping safe and well wherever you are. A little bit of housekeeping. We plan to go for about an hour, and during this hour you'll see that you can send us questions. You can type in the bottom of your screen and your question will pop up to me. And if it's something that goes along with what we're talking about, I will break in and say, oh, we have a question to answer. And if not, if it's a question that will wait until the end, then it will be part of our Q&A at the end of the presentation. I am so happy to introduce my colleague, Frankie, who will be doing a fantastic presentation. Frankie is a youth homelessness expert who has presented all over the country for years, is a researcher, has a depth of experience and wisdom and knowledge that I am so grateful for. So Frankie, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. So I'm kind of realizing this topic is not at the forefront of everyone's mind at the moment, perhaps. But this morning I was sort of taking time to think about things and thought over the concepts that we're talking about now. And it struck me how this broader topic that we're discussing of building community around those people who are really most at risk and who are most struggling is more important now than ever. And so I'm really glad to talk with all of you about it today. Thank you for being here. I am going to start specifically talking about youth experiencing homelessness and violence and some of their experiences. But when we get to the role of faith communities and really the important protective role that they serve for society's most underrepresented folks, I think this is all stuff that could be expanded, could be built upon, could be adapted, could spur something else entirely. So thank you for figuring it out as we go together. This is good. I'm going to start with the concept of entrenchment. Really, this is stuckness. And to understand the experience of homelessness, this is a critical piece of things. So even after my own lived experience of homelessness as a young person and the associated trauma, I was unprepared when I started as a nonprofit director with the extent to which I saw sexual exploitation, victimization, and really the scale of things. It was just everywhere all the time. My second night running a drop-in center, I had a 15-year-old trans girl report to me that she'd been sexually assaulted, and we just had to figure out how to deal with it from there. In my interactions with homeless youth in the years that followed, I developed such an awareness of the role of sexual exploitation and trafficking in this, what I call entrenchment. So the process of entrenchment is what I've tried to depict on this slide. Really, it begins with a loss of community and loss of support, and it ends in complete hopelessness. Entrenchment is it's the mental piece, and it's really what makes exiting homelessness harder and harder the longer that you're experiencing it. So entrenchment really has a lot of negative consequences, obviously mental health-wise, but health-wise, spiritual-wise, in every sense that last an entire lifetime. So faith communities play a critical role. Sorry, was someone trying to say something? Okay. All right, so let's talk about prevention for a minute. It's really important to know who is most likely to experience these things when we talk about prevention. So like so many issues of social concern, really systems of oppression underlie sex trafficking. And we know this for several reasons. We know that young women who are experiencing homelessness are twice as likely as young men experiencing homelessness to be trafficked. We know that LGBTQ plus youth are about 3 times as likely to be sexually assaulted while they're experiencing homelessness than their cisgender straight peers. And we know they're about twice as likely to be trafficked as well. And youth of color are also disproportionately trafficked. So recently we have some good data from Connecticut that shows that about 3/4 of youth who had been trafficked were youth of color. And that's compared to about only 43% of the overall population of youth in Connecticut. So the higher rates of trafficking for both LGBTQ youth and for youth of color really evidence the difficulties that these groups in particular face in finding inclusive community and finding that ongoing support. So it's especially important when we are talking about the role of faith communities to ensure that we are mindful of this, that we're welcoming and inviting women, trans, and femme people, that we're welcoming LGBTQ plus people, that we're welcoming people of color, because they are at higher risk for these outcomes. So that said, these three concepts here are pretty broad. You'll see connection, community, and opportunity are the main words I want to talk about here. These represent strategies for improving outcomes really for all youth. And these are things that help all of us really as human beings. So it's broader than that. Whether or not we're in the entrenchment process, these are things that can benefit us. So we'll talk more specifically about what these look like in this context in a little bit here. But Marian, how about you talk about the role of faith communities a little?
Yes, Frankie, thank you. Faith communities have a unique opportunity to be helpful to youth experiencing homelessness, particularly LGBTQ youth. Faith communities often have many volunteers who are willing and looking for ways that they can help in the world. Faith communities and churches often have resources that they can bring that can be helpful, whether it's financial or food or connections that are tremendously helpful. Faith communities and churches often have space, and that can be tremendously useful as well to youth, and a heart for helping. People of faith want to be helpful in the world and definitely have a heart for adults and youth experiencing homelessness. Something that I would add as a person who is a executive director of an LGBT advocacy group that focuses on faith, so much of the homophobia and transphobia in the world is related to faith, unfortunately. And that is the perception as well in the world, that if you're an LGBT person, you need to pick a team. You need to either be LGBT or a person of faith. You can't be both. And well, I'm living proof that you can be both, because I'm an LGBT minister. But so many LGBT folks are afraid of people of faith, are afraid of religion, don't have a relationship with God. And I believe that people of faith and churches and faith communities have a special responsibility to reach out and to be helpful and to assist and do what we can to help LGBT youth who are at risk, who are experiencing homelessness, and to do what we can in the world. I think Frankie, there we go, thank you. Speaking of someone who knows a lot about this subject, I'm going to turn over our time to John Sheehan. John runs an incredible program out of Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church. John, I'm going to just let you speak because you live this every day in so many ways.
Program for people. Am I on? Hi, I run a street outreach program for people on the street and in all over New York City. And what we do is run a program based upon a trauma-informed care perspective. We assume and believe that virtually everybody on the street has been traumatized. And when we come across or deal with a person who's younger, I almost always look at an assumption, the fact that they've probably been sexually abused, and many of them are running away from abuse in their families or homes based upon their sexual orientation. So they're fleeing, they're looking for safety. Some people might be surprised, well, why would they flee and find safety on the streets of New York City? Well, for them, it's a better life than the life of oppression and violence they may have come from. And by being on the street, they're able to somehow feel that they have some little piece to themselves. What do we know about homelessness? In general, we know that people who live on the street are by and large isolated from other people and isolated from society. They're lonely, they're depressed. But one of the key things are too is they're vulnerable. It's really dangerous to be living on the street. And in New York City, disproportionately, people who live on the street are far more often the victims of crime than are they the perpetrators of crime. We recently, this summer, saw the horrific murder of 3 people who were homeless on the street in downtown Manhattan. Regretfully, for those of us who work with people on the street, none of that, I mean, we were shocked, but we know that violence exists every day. And people are picked on or preyed upon for different reasons. And gay and lesbian, transgender, bisexual youth are far more vulnerable than anyone, because people within that community see them as different. And they are oppressed within that community, just as people of gay, lesbian, bisexuality, and transgender are preyed upon in the larger society, just as much as they're preyed upon in boardrooms and colleges and university. When they're on the street, they're preyed upon more too, because they're seen as being different and vulnerable. When I attended recently a conference on homelessness at the UN, in which I participated for a wonderful group, Unanima International, and we looked at programs on the street, or for people on the street all over the world. And some things they talked about were that there are structural reasons and personal reasons for homelessness. Some of the structural ones are racism, poverty, war, famine, all these big issues that affect. Also, there are personal ones, such as health issues that can cause that, the loss of a job, poverty being both personal and structural, family issues. Of course, we're talking about, again, gay, lesbian adolescents and adults who come very often are going to try to separate from that type of violence in the family. But one of the things that they didn't mention in the structural part, which I found not to be acceptable, is they didn't mention homophobia. And I believe that homophobia is a structural form of one of the reasons that people are homeless. Because when we talk about structural, we think of things that are out of people's control. And just like famine, war, and poverty and racism are out of the control of the people who are victims, homophobia is too. And homophobia plays a major part in the reason why people who are gay and lesbian and transgender go to the streets and try to find their own community and safety. We are not a faith-based outreach program. We believe in meeting the person where they're at in a classic sense, and that's what trauma-informed care does. It gives you a perspective. We try to help people feel safe. We try to help them, provide them sanctuary. But we also do a thing which is we follow the client. We don't pull the client or the person, the young person, to where we want to be. We let them lead us. We listen to them where they want to go. And from a perspective of trauma, one of the worst things you can do to a person is to tell them, hey, you need to do this and you need to do that. Honestly, if that was me on the street, I would go, you know what, F you. I'm going to do what I want to do. So when we go and meet a person, we start off by doing some simple things, like saying hello, asking them how they are, trying to give them some things. Marion has been out with us, and her groups have been very generous in providing things and supplies to people on the street. And those things mean a lot, because when you're going to meet somebody, instead of just saying, hey, here's a, give us a call, why don't you go up the street? We're saying, hey, do you need this? Could you use some toiletry supplies? Could you use some hand sanitizer, especially today? Those things really mean a lot. They start a relationship. So what we try to do is start a relationship with the person, not tell the person that we're this authority figure and this is what you should do. One of the things too that we've seen for so long is the fact is that with trauma is that people need time. They just need some time, and they need to be treated in a way which we all would want to be treated for. When you're on the street, you have no place to hide. Your bad days are visible to all. I saw a young woman the other day who, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know if she's gay or not, but I think she may be, I'm not sure. It's hypothetical whether she's not. But she was crying hysterically on the street, and she was very embarrassed. I tried to gently walk over and ask her if I can help her. And she told me, thank you, but she said she just needed a cup of coffee or something like that, or I got a cup of coffee. But there she was out in the middle of 8th Avenue in Manhattan. And even though there's less people on the street in New York City, there are still a lot. And her vulnerability was out there to be seen by all. What would happen to that young woman at 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, or 3 o'clock in the morning if she's out there crying? That's one of the risk factors, one of the many risk factors for people who are living on the street who are gay, lesbian, transgender. They're vulnerable and they're out there. And we need to think of more creative ways to engage in. Finally, on a faith-based perspective, as I said before, we're not. I met a man on the street I did a video with, and I was doing a video doing outreach, and he said we can film the video. And he says to me, But look, I don't want to go to that church. I don't believe in God. And I told him, you don't need to believe in God. We believe in you. And that's what people who are on the street need to hear, that we believe in them. And we need to invite them, not expect them to join us. We need to invite them. Thank you.
Amen, John. Thank you. Thank you. Exactly right. It's people being human beings to each other. It's so important. And I love what you said about it doesn't matter if you believe in God. We believe in you. God believes in you. And we're here to be human beings together. Something that came to mind as well, John, when you were speaking, we found when we were surveying youth experiencing homelessness that 50% of the LGBT youth experiencing homelessness had been kicked out of the family home by religiously conservative parents and extended family. And often this happened around holidays. It happened around Christmas. It happened around Thanksgiving. Yes, it's the time of year when parents or family will say, oh no, Vera's coming over for dinner and little Johnny, I don't know, Johnny, get out of here. And that's what Frankie and I saw over and over again with the drop-in center, is that youth would show up with a suitcase saying, well, I had 5 minutes to throw things, and I have a backpack with clothes in it, but I don't have any toiletries, or I don't have this, that, and the other. And so many of them, practically all of them, if they are on the streets long enough, within 36 hours, a sexual predator or trafficker will be in contact with them. So
or when they turn 18 also. It's
absolutely.
like when they turn 18 also, it's like, goodbye. I had to put up with you being gay. Now I don't have to anymore. Get out of my house.
Exactly.
I've heard that so many times.
Yeah, and youth aging out of foster care as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Rev.
Thank you, John. Frankie, I think you're in control of our slides. Oh, thank you for advancing it. Seamus, I am so happy to introduce you. Seamus has a beautiful ministry in New York, and we are so fortunate to have you here, Seamus, to talk to us.
Are you seeing me? Okay.
Yes.
I'm not seeing myself. I'm not seeing myself. Okay. So yes, I'm the pastor of Madison Square Park Congregation of Ecclesia Ministries. Ecclesia Ministries is a ministry in 1994 in Boston by the Reverend Debbie Little, who was an Episcopal priest, who worked at St. Paul Cathedral and realized that there were so many homeless people right across the street on Boston Common, and was wondering who's taking care of them, who's pastorally taking care of them. And she started pastorally going outside and just engaging people with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a cup of coffee, and the opportunity to pray. And that ministry has grown to over 200 missions throughout the world. We're in Brazil, we're in England, we're in continental Europe. We're now all over the place. So we have two active congregations in New York City, Madison Square Park and Marcus Garvey Park, which is up in Harlem. And we are supported by congregations, local congregations. So our support is totally ecumenical. We have support from the Episcopal Church, several Episcopal churches, Reformed Church, American Baptist Church, have had Lutheran churches, and for many years had a United Methodist Church. And those congregations gather in their own congregations on Sunday in their assigned week, and they prepare bagged lunches. But then the odd thing about them is that then they come down to Madison Square Park or the Church of the Transfiguration, where we're sort of meeting, and they share lunch and we share Eucharist. Madison Square Park as all ecclesia ministries are Eucharistically focused and Eucharistically centered. So everybody is welcome at the table. Everybody is welcome without exception. So we break bread in Jesus' name. We continue in the apostles' teaching and fellowship and the prayers, and we share a meal, both a spiritual meal in the Eucharist, and we share a meal. And through the years, wonderful community has formed here. Many of our well-heeled members of our congregations have grown to know so many of the members of our street congregation. And I also have to say about our street congregation that it's really a stable group. I have one of my guys, Philip, who was baptized and confirmed last year, is 76 years old. And since the congregation in New York came into existence 13 years ago, Philip has not missed a Sunday. He gets the Sunday School Award by all means. And another fellow, Afif. Afif is not even a Christian, and Afif helps me with the altar and receives communion every week. Yeah, we had the bishop, one of the bishops of New York, do confirmation and baptized one of our members. Two of our members were confirmed, and one was baptized last year. And when I asked Afif, I said, "Do you have any interest in getting baptized or confirmed?" He said, "Oh, no, 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 no." And I said, "Okay, well, just, you know," but he's there every week. Now we have in this congregation, we have people who are identify as gay and lesbian, and who grew up, they're on the streets. So there was trauma early in their lives, trauma that kind of surfaced with drug addiction or with alcoholism. And so there's been a lot of trauma, and we do kind of address this from a trauma-informed care as well, but from a pastoral perspective. And I also serve as the Director of Outreach Ministries at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church. And although that's a changing title, I'm becoming the Director of Homeless Ministries at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church through the Ecumenical Outreach Partnership. So that's a little about what I do.
John, thank you so much. I was wondering, what is happening now with our current social isolation? Does the ministry need to be discontinued on the street, or what's happening?
James.
Yeah, for Madison Square Park congregation, as of last Sunday, we had to put the ministry into suspension. We were planning on coming back into being on Easter Sunday, but since the time that we have last met, the Bishop of New York has also closed all Episcopal churches until the 17th of May. So we're sort of under that because the altar lives in an Episcopal church. And in the winter months and in wet weather, we're in an Episcopal church, Church of the Transfiguration on East 29th Street. So everything is in suspension right now. Because I have a difficulty in getting hold of a lot of my parishioners have all been given a bulletin that has some prayers on it and also has a way of contacting myself and the deacon that I have working with me. So their numbers, that they have our numbers. So they have to call us. That's the best way that we can get hold of them.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. What needs are there right now, John and Seamus, in terms of goods and materials and things that people could send and donate? Are there any emerging needs right now? You mentioned hand sanitizer. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, any type of, the hand sanitizer obviously is crucial, but hand wipes, you know, people utilize too, any type of wipes like that. Because always remember that the homeless, the people living on the street, don't have access to water. And it's gotten worse because so many institutions, I mean, Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church had to close because of the virus. Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church has always had an open restroom to the public, to anybody. Before Ecumenical Outreach Partnership existed, it's always had an open restroom. And it's always been a welcoming place, but because of the virus, they now have had to, you know, for the safety of the staff and anybody else, they've had to close. And so, so it's really important. And any type of deodorants, small, you know, and I'll give you another one, Rev, is Band-Aids. When you live on the street, we talk about infection. Many people, you see people homeless on the street, you'll see all kinds of cuts and things on their hands and feet and things like that. Band-Aids are very expensive in New York City. Regretfully, most of the time, they don't wind up covering themselves up, and it's a ripe place for infection. And any kind of a toiletry article, obviously female toiletries, anything like that is very much appreciated, because not only is that toiletry helping the person, but that toiletry is helping us start a relationship with a person. So you think of the toiletry as being a really important need, and it is, but it's also helping that person connect those services that people are going to provide more help to them.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. And attendees, what we will do after the workshop is done, we'll be sending out an email with handouts with information, but also with a list of things that can be donated and where to send them. So thank you, John, for sharing
My
that.
pleasure.
I am going to share a video by Santea, and please forgive me because this technology is new to me. Santea is, as you can see, Santea,
To all of us.
to all of us, yes, and we're sharing grace, I hope. So I'm going to share this video now and pray that it works well. Let's see, there we go.
Yay.
LGBT youth and homelessness and how we can be a support. This workshop, Empowering Faith Communities to Prevent Violence Against Youth Experiencing Homelessness, is a very important one. And considering that and what we all are currently experiencing right now in our country, with the coronavirus, with the self-isolation, the just not knowing, right, for just things being very unknown. And for me, when I began to think about youth that I've encountered that are experiencing homelessness or transient in some way, and then the intersections of those youth, how that crosses many areas, whether it's financially, whether it's lack of education, whether it's youth of color, and then finally, what all of us are here today to learn more about is how that intersects with LGBT youth and with our youth. They a lot of them intersect at all those levels, which is even more devastating. So juxtapose that to something really current that we're all experiencing right now, which is learning to navigate this new normal within with the coronavirus. Like, what does that mean for a young person who's already experiencing life at these very extreme and difficult trajectory points? I learned last week via email that the center in New York City, if some of you are familiar with, but serves a lot of young people, a lot of people in general, a lot of people in the community. And they unfortunately, they had to close their doors because they definitely serve hundreds of people every day. And just as we're all trying to prevent the spread and, figure out the best ways to stem this, I immediately thought, wow, what about all the youth that are there at the center? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're signed up for programs or members of groups, and I think this is an important thing to consider. They're there because it's a place that they can be, and they can be there throughout the extent of the center being open, and the center has very late hours. And then I thought about schools, which are locations where you can get meals, right? You get support, hopefully. And then what happens to the youth that is already experiencing all these different levels of displacement and trauma and depression, hunger. Like, what happens when the typical places like school and maybe like a community center would be open is now closed? And then when we juxtapose that to what we're talking about today, is how we can empower faith communities to be a partner, faith communities, churches, houses of worship, meditation, whatever the case may be. These are places typically that welcome everyone. And then when we think about when these places or the people that run these places are unable to offer that welcome, like, again, what what that does to this young person. And when I engage young people, the thing that I notice and that really, really stands out for me is that community connection. Like everybody wants community, everybody wants connection. Like that is how we are oriented in the world. Like right now, full disclosure, I'm experiencing extreme boredom and isolation from having to just work from home and be in my room all these hours and days. Um, so I can't imagine what it would be like to have community, to have family, to have all the support, and then one day it's just gone because who you are at your core, your spirit, the way God made you, does not align with what someone, your family or your faith community thinks it should, and then now you're outside. For me, that just rings over and over again when engaging young people. Like they want to be connected, right? Whether it's a faith community, whether it's just a community of concerned people, whether it's friends, it's like a human desire to have connection, and that is why it's so important for us to discuss this topic, discuss strategies, discuss bridging work. For you being online today, you could be doing other things, you could be binging on Netflix or something, but to be here to understand and learn and help become a part of this bridge of solutions to support our young people, because not to be corny, but they are the future. So my reflection, my testimonial is that this is extremely important work. I'm really excited for all of you who choose to be a part of this webinar and who choose to be a partner in supporting our young people and knowing just how important it is, and that community and connection is something we all deserve. It's not something that should be taken from anybody, and we all need to fight that. Thank you.
Frankie, I'll turn it back to you to share your screen again.
I'm learning.
I'm learning too. Please be patient with us as we learn.
Here we are, I think.
Wonderful.
All right.
Palayo, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody. I'm also learning not only from the technology, but from everybody talking. So I am really grateful that we decided to continue with the workshop, even if it's in an online manner, and keep things going, that at least you have the sense that not everything is canceled and we can continue as much as we can with our activities. So thank you for that, Marian. Really appreciate it. And thank you for having me today in this panel. I wanted to start talking a little bit about the work that I do and my experience with the organization. I'm the host of the Forbidden Apple, host and producer, and the Forbidden Apple is an online platform where we explore the relationship between queerness and religion in the form of podcast episodes. Marian was talking how we are often pushed to pick a team when we are talking about LGBTQ youth and faith. And what we're trying to portray is exactly the opposite. We have had a lot of beautiful, positive stories, but some of our guests have been unfortunately not had an easy journey. They have faced rejection, they have faced issues like addiction, homelessness, and many other issues that affect our community, unfortunately. But our intention through all this is to showcase these individuals who are in the forefront of the fight for religious freedom within the LGBTQ community. They're decided, and they're individuals that are indeed combining religion and queerness. So this is not only possible, but also revolutionary. This way we try to express an affirming message so people don't have to choose. They have some representation in an online media, like could be this podcast, and they know what it is to live in the intersection. I've heard a lot of objectives throughout the different presentations, and our objective with this work is to increase the representation of communities that sometimes we don't pay attention to, that sometimes are marginalized. We want to create a community of support that would be able to have shared advice for queer individuals that have gone through these experiences and are able to showcase what they've gone through, so more people can learn from their experience. I felt when I came to this work that the media was portraying negative 100% coverage of the relationship between faith spaces and queer people. And I think that it's very important to showcase that there are indeed organizations like Parity, organizations like all the different panelists and experts that we've had today that are actually supporting the community, and they are incorporating faith into this support. So we don't have to completely separate these two groups. And in the situation that we are right now, when I was thinking of what to really go through today, I was thinking back to November when I was talking a little bit about the homelessness outreach program with Parity, and the situation as it is right now, as dark as it is also a great moment for reflection. I talked last time about the sense of privilege and the sense of understanding what we have. And in times of fear, crisis, and uncertainty, this becomes even more important because we are able to put our foot in the shoes of people that go through these sensations of fear and crisis every day. And how can we look at this not from a perspective of this is not good for anybody, but how can we learn and have like this experience reinforces and create empathy with us? We're talking about connection, we're talking about community, and the language that we are using with the homeless is in how it is creating a relationship more than just like we was talking before, how we can offer things instead of just imposing on them. And I think that is so important because at the end, this whole experience, I have taken it as a way of learning, building empathy with other human beings, and more like a takeaway for me than for the other people that are on the other side. And especially in this city, and especially now, these kind of programs are so important and so disregarded sometimes because it's a community that is so looked down on. I'm really proud to be part of this panel today, and I'm taking a lot of notes and a lot of conclusions from everybody speaking here that I hope I can incorporate in the work from here on now. So thank you very much, Marian, and everybody for having me here today.
Pelayo, thank you. Both Pelayo and Santea went with us when we did the street outreach with John, and we met with Seamus. So what we do as a group, we have met, and hopefully we will again. We meet at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church. We have a brief training on youth homelessness, and we have care kits that we then take to youth on the streets. And this is a monthly ministry that happens, and we look for volunteers who would like to be part of a street outreach team or who would like to donate goods to it, hygiene items, those types of things. So that'll be part of what we share afterwards. It's an opportunity if it's something that anyone would like to be part of. Jesse, yay.
Hey. I guess I can just kind of jump in. I kind of stole Frankie's seat. I don't know if you guys noticed that we transitioned spots, but she's got the better microphone.
Is it echoing for everybody or no?
Is it echoing for you folks? Nope, you guys are good?
No.
Okay.
Sound okay?
Sí.
Excellent, cool. Well, thank you guys for letting me be a part of this webinar. I'm very new to Parity and your guys' advocacy work, so I'm just starting to get my feet wet, as if you will. My name is Jesse Ryan Feaster. I use he, his, him pronouns. I'm essentially a representative of the transgender community for today's webinar. I identify as a transgender white man. I started my physical transition about 2 years ago, but was out slightly before that, a little bit, like a few months, mostly to close folks like Frankie and some family and folks at my CrossFit gym. But before that, going through typical like transgender therapy and stuff like that, but physically transitioning, still with no success of growing a beard, but I do currently pass, so close, currently pass as male when I'm out in public. I don't get misgendered very often. I like to use or want to emphasize that I am passing, so it kind of means that I get some privilege over, I don't want to say over other transgender folks, but I do experience more social norms than some folks probably would. It's also allowed me to live in minimal fear with little experience in as far as transphobia for myself, but I know that others, like family and friends that have experienced different situations. And then I'll also kind of explain what experience I do have as far as transphobia. I also acknowledge the fact that there are many other extreme cases of transphobia out there that I've probably never witnessed or heard of. And I'll do my best today to represent the trans community in our webinar. But kind of just stepping forward into like what transphobia is. I know most of you probably understand or have done some research into it because of the advocacy work you guys are doing. But the act of intense dislike or of our prejudice against transgender people, things such as fear, anger, hatred, and discomfort, acts of physical or emotional abuse. And then one that probably gets overlooked a bit is outing of a trans person against their will. And that kind of was one of my experiences with transphobia. Had a close friend that I came out to, wasn't completely out to the majority of the community that I engaged with in family, and they were okay with telling people that I was trans without my permission, which was one of my examples. And that obviously brought on some trauma and some other things that I've had to work through. I've also dealt with family relationship trauma, and this one's probably pertaining a little bit closely to, or pertains a little bit more closely to what you guys are working with. But my relationship with my father ended due to his spiritual beliefs and his outside influences, with his girlfriend being very religious. She has then kind of instilled a hatred and fear into my father for transgender folks, and has kind of changed the way he thought and thinks. Spoke a lot with my sister about it and tried to digest it with her. And it seems as if her influence kind of outweighs our relationship. So he prioritizes their relationship over mine, and that's completely fine. That's up to him. But that is just one form of transphobia that I have witnessed. Trying to tie things together as far as transphobia and like what we're talking today. I know you guys touched a little bit about this earlier, but transgender youth are at higher risk for homelessness due to transphobia, and are equally exposed to having to engage in acts of sexual survival and trafficking due to their circumstances of being homeless. Out of the population of the LGBTQ community and youth who are having to partake in these survival acts and are at an even higher risk are trans women of color. And homeless shelters currently pose a threat to LGBTQ plus communities because they're not inclusive to the community. So gender biased things and the binary influences on them make it hard for LGBTQ folks to feel comfortable going to those places. And so this is kind of like, I know is a lot of your guys' advocacy work trying to make these places safe and welcoming. And so in my experience, grew up in a Lutheran family. We didn't have to frequent church every Sunday or anything like that, but I did attend Bible schools and Bible studies during the summer. And I still go to church with my family when we're there for Christmas and such. But things that like I would want to see in a faith-based community that makes it feel welcoming to me as a transgender person. I just kind of want to start with visible inclusion. Those would be things such as like gender neutral bathrooms, pronoun name tags, equality symbols or flags, equal representation of attire. So like not everyone's dressed in a suit and tie, and non-binary vocabulary. So instead of using guys and girls, you can use folks, they, them, etc. As far as the community, seeing LGBTQ plus leaders, so like folks that are leading the faith-based community are out and proud, diverse appearing folks and different cultural representations. And then a welcoming atmosphere and warm greetings. So going into a church and having someone come up to you and just introduce themselves is huge. Instead of like, that person looks different, I'm gonna neglect that person and let them just sit in the back pew and not talk to them. I know a lot of the times the services have you get up and meet everybody, but like having them approach you in the beginning before service even starts. Also, something that I like to see is partnerships with LGBT plus organizations. So like Parity working with X, Y, and Z ministry or something like that, where you are visibly partnering with these LGBTQ organizations, whether that's Pride or, well, what's Utah's? I don't know. Utah Pride. But different organizations such as that. And then just also having like a media presence, a social media presence, or your advertising that targets inclusive communities. So whether your Facebook page has a rainbow flag on it or your website at the bottom has an equality symbol, those are definitely something else that the LGBTQ plus and transgender folks like to see to feel welcome to come into your space. But some just kind of tips and tricks moving forward, and then we can kind of transition this back to more parody things. Offering up ways to acknowledge pronouns safely without anyone is huge. So name tags, or even when you're doing introductions around the room, having you have folks say your pronouns right off the bat, so then you're not even making a mistake. So like today when I introduce myself, I use he, his, him pronouns right after my name, so you guys should feel comfortable using those correct pronouns. If you suspect a person is trans, be respectful and don't ask them about it. Like, don't be forward. Don't just be like, hey, you look kind of trans. Are you trans? I mean, no one's gonna ask that, or I hope not. But let them approach you and then have them share that information. That will help make them feel safe. If you happen to misgender a trans person, don't apologize. You don't have to say, I'm sorry. Just say, thank you for correcting me and move on. Not making it a big deal will make it feel, will make them feel more safe in the situation, and it doesn't have to become a big thing. And then also just don't talk about a person's gender identity behind their back without their permission. This is something that I'm not sure if it happens a lot because it's obviously behind closed doors, but just when you're talking about someone, make sure that you have permission to use whatever they identify as. But that's all I got, just kind of as a transgender representative.
Yeah, we're gonna switch.
Okay.
Jesse, thank you. Thank you so much.
Was that a seamless switch between the
That
two
was
of
a
us?
wonderful switch. Yes, very seamless.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah.
I put Jesse on the spot completely and he rolled with it and did awesome. So thanks. This is my favorite new tip is we saw this on social media actually, but if you misgender someone accidentally and they correct you, saying thank you is it sets up such a better situation than saying I'm sorry and forcing them to say, oh, it's okay, awkwardly. So say thank you. And I'm going to practice doing that myself. I like that idea a lot. Hey, so Marion, am I just moving forward? Does anyone have anything to add or questions? That was pretty amazing to hear those different perspectives. I enjoyed that so very much. So I realized that I didn't talk a lot. I wanted to take just a minute because I didn't talk a ton here about kind of where homelessness and trafficking meet, and why we're talking about all this together, and why the work that John is doing and Seamus is doing and that we're all trying to work together to do is so critical, because preventing homelessness is important, obviously, but working with folks who are currently experiencing homelessness and youth who are experiencing homelessness while they're in that entrenchment process, if we can prevent trafficking and just further trauma, is so important. So about 1 in 5 homeless youth have experienced trafficking or have been trafficked. And by that, I mean they've been recruited, harbored, transported, or obtained as a person for sex. And the connection here is important because most frequently when we ask youth why they became trafficked or kind of what led up to that, they say it's a direct result of their homelessness. It started with engaging in survival sex, so having to trade sex to meet basic needs, usually more often than not for a place to stay overnight. And that evolves into a situation with a lot of exploitation and just gets progressively more and more controlling. So when we hear things like the work that y'all are doing, it makes me so happy because by meeting the basic needs of folks who are experiencing homelessness, whether that's their spiritual needs, whether that's food, whether that's the need for social belonging, we're preventing that whole trajectory of being entrenched. Okay, so I'll move forward now with what we're talking about. I want to touch briefly, I touched on these 3 things, these 3 concepts of connection, community, and opportunity. But these are kind of what this might look like for a faith community. So connection, I call these areas of action, first of all, rather than goals, because I kind of see them as these ongoing big processes rather than a box that a faith community checks off on the way. So research shows that young people benefit from having just one adult in their life who's positive, consistent, supportive. And this is often apparent for a lot of lucky youths, but this could also be a faith leader. This could be extended family. This could be a coach. This could be a youth faith leader. So anyone who can provide those natural supports when a youth is unable to stabilize themselves and really need somewhere to turn. That's what we're talking about with connection. Faith communities who support and embrace the families of LGBTQ plus youth provide such a powerful means of preventing homelessness and victimization and all of this. So both supporting families and providing these loving environments and affirming pastoral care for LGBTQ people themselves are what I'm talking about when I say connection here. It's really that, like, the smaller dynamics, the micro interactions with these people and their families. So community is looking a little bit more macro, moving beyond that. I like to think of inclusive community as a safety net to catch people when their family of origin fails them. So for some youth, their family really will just never be a safe and positive place. That's not the majority of youth, but this happens. Research also shows that youth being trafficked by a member of their family or a family friend is not uncommon. So under these types of circumstances, faith communities really can step in and provide like that consistency and encouragement and help meeting basic needs that these youth aren't getting from their own parents. And having access to caring mentors within a faith community can really provide that stabilizing force that's so critical in prevention. Opportunities is the last area, and really this is just where I see people thrive. So giving young people opportunities to learn is very important, but we tend to talk less about how important it is to give them chances to lead, to teach, to make decisions. But when we feel like we're contributing, we develop self-efficacy. We all want to feel that way, like we're not just needing things, but that we're also contributing something valuable. And that's where the magic starts to happen when you work with youth. So self-efficacy really, and giving opportunities to develop that, is the antidote to learned helplessness and to this process of entrenchment. So we'll have another workshop actually next month about that, and we'll talk more about this. But really, this is about recognizing that youth do have expertise in both the issues that they're facing and the solutions that themselves and their peers would benefit from. So in my experience, youth tend to thrive when we give them decision-making power, when we give them resources to accomplish what they want to accomplish, and when we open doors for them to contribute in their own types of ways. So all of those areas of action are, this is a big picture. They encompass a lot. So I'd like to end with something that feels a little bit more tangible, a little bit doable. So these are some ideas that I have, but I hope that they'll kind of spark your own thoughts and that you can adapt them or combine them or kind of, or that this is just the start of a conversation for us. So I'm going to be brief here, but here are some quick ideas for faith communities, specifically to start right now. Assembling hygiene kits is one that y'all have talked about and that Marion and I have seen a lot of faith communities make awesome positive change through. So this is really simple. You could call a service provider, tell them you're putting together hygiene kits and ask what their most needed items are. There's a list, like Marion said, in the handout that's provided of some basic things. And I love that John mentioned Band-Aids. Having like first aid kits sounds like such a good idea of something to include. That's a great idea. If you don't have homeless service providers in your area, there are McKinney-Vento liaisons in each school district. So that's another kind of way, is to look at the school districts and ask what their need is. You could check in with a librarian. They are so informed about what's going on, and they tend to be amazing with this kind of stuff. So find a librarian. You could also just assemble these kits and keep them in your meeting space or in your church. Keep some in your car, wherever. Okay, so another quick way now is to compile resources. So this could look a few different ways. You could compile a list of basic needs services if that's not available where you are. I think where a lot of y'all are, there are these lists that exist, and then your task would just be really to make sure that it's up to date and accessible to people that might benefit. So things like a foldable card that shows where to find food, where to find clothing, where to find shelter. Another list of resources that could be compiled is LGBTQ specific resources and supports. Both local and national types of resources can be helpful. And then just have it on hand for when a young person comes out to their family, so that you can give their family some good resources and support and tell them where PFLAG is and all of those good things. Another way this could look, if you're feeling ambitious, would be to look at putting together a team of volunteers to compile a list of affirming healthcare and mental health care providers. So calling around and asking some questions. And I go into a little more detail on that in the handout, but I would love to have this conversation with anyone who's interested as well. So because LGBTQ folks have often had negative experiences with medical and mental health professionals, you can, as an ally, one of the big things you can do is really act as a buffer or a shield, and be the one to kind of feel that out, because those exchanges can be kind of traumatic at times. So an educational event, this is another simple one. I thought that this was going to be so difficult to do until Marion started forcing me to do this very frequently. Not forcing. I was encouraged to hold these types of community events, and it's simple and it's easy. And I was intimidated by it, but it's not that way. So be the conversation starter. Like I've always been a little bit nervous about it, and I've always been so grateful that this group of people was brought together. So you could find a speaker. You could put together a panel, but you could also do things like host a resource fair. We've done things where we gathered a ton of different service providers and gave them each 5 minutes to talk about what they offer, just so that they all know what each other has to offer the community. So there's so many ways you can do it, and we can creatively work together to find online versions, I think, of most of those things. I've been brainstorming on that today. So if anyone wants to talk about that, let's please talk about how things could be adapted for like live stream or live chat kinds of scenarios. So we talked, I feel like I don't need to hit very hard on this because we have talked about it, but I love that we've talked about trauma-informed approaches a lot. That is an important piece of all of this. And when I talk about giving youth decision-making power and focusing on their strengths and all those good things, that's all part of a trauma-informed lens and those best practices. So it sounds like a lot of y'all are already involved in this work and doing trauma-informed work. So in the handout, this is kind of what I say, but this is really, I think that engaging youth as partners starts with being very intentional in our day-to-day interactions with these young people. So practice listening. Begin to notice areas where youth can be given more decision-making power, where we can share our power. Ask for their ideas, focus on their strengths. And right now it might be especially important to invite young people to talk about their hopes, their fears, their ideas for change, all of that. We all want to be heard. So in the handout, I listed some frameworks that I think are really helpful, like lenses is how I think of them, from which to view things. And trauma-informed approaches was one of them. Cultural humility is another one that I've found really helpful for myself. And many of you are probably familiar. If not, I would start with a TED Talk called Cultural Humility by Dr. Juliana Mosley. And then another framework I found useful is authentic youth engagement. And a lot of that research is done by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who work with youth who experience foster care. So how to partner with youth in foster care to create change is kind of what they were doing. And then they have a lot of great resources on youth-adult partnerships. So I'd like to end here. And John, you actually beautifully talked about a lot of this. So we surveyed youth receiving services in drop-in centers throughout northern Utah. Many of them were LGBTQ+, many of them were currently experiencing homelessness. And I was pretty alarmed when we found out that 62% of them had attempted suicide. I was more unsettled when I found out that this rate was not irregular, that this is kind of what we see nationwide. We have a colleague, Kai Noble, who walked across the US, staying with camps of homeless youth and really doing an ethnographic study of youth homelessness. They didn't call it that, but that's what it was. So when we talked to Kai about this, what they heard most frequently and universally when they asked these youth, what do you want people to hear? Or what do you need people to know? What they said was, look me in my eyes. As a homeless youth, you're in kind of a world layered on top of another world, and you sort of feel like you're outside of it all. And when people constantly pass without acknowledging you, this feeling of being on the outside really persists and grows and contributes to feeling dehumanized and entrenchment. When I think about the times that I've failed to look a person experiencing homelessness in the eyes, it's usually because I might not feel like I know what to say, or I'm scared that I might say the wrong thing. But saying something is better than saying nothing. And there's some ideas. Let's see. So just thinking about this, when do I feel uncomfortable in these situations and looking someone in the eyes? Sometimes when I don't have any money or anything with me to offer them, I might feel uncomfortable. Or when I'm really just in a hurry. But then I'm working to remind myself that taking a moment to look someone in their eye and say something to them takes zero money, and it really takes very little time. So being looked in the eyes with empathy and love is important for all humans. It's particularly important for someone who is in that process of entrenchment, though. So there's a great article on the symbolic burden of homelessness. But when the thoughts that cycle through your head all day are things like, I am a failure, I am not valued by society, and the worst one, I think, I am a burden, a smile and just a few words could really be the only evidence that you have that day to the contrary. And that's where those little seeds of self-efficacy start to grow. So if we move beyond the conversation about youth experiencing homelessness specifically, I guess I would love to see a conversation continue, and for this to sort of be the start of how do we look people in the eye? How do we connect critically as humans, particularly with those that are kind of being left behind with things right now? And what does it look like for us to, from 6 feet away always, to look each other in the eye? Yeah, Marion, do you want to add to that? Or anybody, does anybody want to add?
Frankie, thank you. I'm going to unmute everyone and ask if you have any last comments. All of our questions were covered, and I'm watching to see if anyone has other questions to add, but Do our panelists have any final words, anything that we didn't say that we should?
I'd like to say something, Marianne.
Please do.
It's a follow-up to, which was a beautiful ending of the session there. It was wonderful. As just like look into the eyes, one of the things at the conference in the UN, one of the things they talk about is listen to the person's story. You know, we do make, you know, statistical things about who homeless people are, who gay, lesbian, homeless youth are, but everyone has an individual story, and everyone is an individual. And when you really listen to a person and you then know their story, you're really connecting heart to heart. I mean, it's really a powerful thing, because then they are trusting you with their story. And then that's by knowing their story, you're then better able to help and assist them. And that's that human connection. And so look them in the eyes and learn their story, because that's how you're going to help them. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for being here, all of the panelists for being here and sharing your expertise, all of our attendees from all over the world. Thank you for joining us today. This will be recorded and available for use. The United Nations will also have a recording that they will be sharing as well. I will be sending out an email with our handouts and with contact information. So if you think of some questions later on, you can get in touch with us, and we hope that you will. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Mary.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
everybody.
you.
Have a good
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nice meeting
Goodbye,
everybody.
everyone.
Peace.